Pickaxe.
Carvana's so easy, just a click, and we've got ourselves a car. See?
So many cars. That's a click-tastic inventory.
And check out the financing options. Payments to fit our budget. I mean, that's...
Clickonomics 101.
Delivery to our door?
Just a hop, skip, and a click away.
And bought.
No better feeling than when everything just clicks. Buy your car today on Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.
You ever listen to an actual play podcast and think, I want to play at that table? No Quest for the Wicked's got you. When a planet mysteriously appears in the Castle solar system, it sparks a chaotic scramble of corporations, scientists, and adventurers. Little do they know, a dark threat hangs over them. And the only two who can stop it are Vlinigan, a father looking for a new start, and Flitwick, a privileged DJ setting out to prove himself to his family. But they have a secret weapon. You, the listener, join the council and vote on important decisions. Create and name NPCs, form factions with other listeners, and even influence the hands of fate themselves. So don't wait. Visit noquestcast.com to claim your seat at our table.
Welcome in, everybody. I'm Jasper. I currently play Ruby Pettigrew on Dungeons and Randomness. If you've been listening to our show for a while, you've probably heard me play a handful of different characters across a lot of years, often in a lot of very bad situations. Now, today's episode is a little different. It's a pause, a breath, a chance to step back and get our bearings. What you're about to hear is a recap of episodes 21 through 40 of Frostbourne. We did the same thing right after episode 20 if you scroll back in the feed. It's a great place to start since we'll be diving right in today. If you're brand new, or you fell a few episodes behind and the backlog started looking less like entertainment and more like a personal challenge, this is for you. Think of it as the shape of the story so far, not every single detail. The important turns, the emotional weather, the things that mattered and the things that are about to. And if you've been with us the whole time, if you know exactly how we got here, this is still for you, because these episodes don't just add information, they change direction. Okay, with that, let me back up. This is Dungeons and Randomness. We've been telling stories together in the world of Theria for 15 years. Long-running campaigns, we call them arcs, shared history, consequences that stick around longer than anyone expects them to. A world that remembers what you do to it. Theria is big. It's dangerous. It doesn't bend just because the story would be cleaner if it did. People make choices here, and those choices echo. Sometimes immediately, sometimes much later when you'd really rather they didn't. And that brings us to Frostbourne. Frostbourne is our 6th major arc, and it's meant to be a place you can step into without homework. You don't need the old campaigns to understand what's happening now, but if you've been with us for a long time, you'll feel the weight of that past in the background. Names that matter, ideas that refuse to stay buried, old scars showing up in new places. Okay, so the early part of Frostbourne is about arrival, about strangers coming together under pressure, and about learning the rules of a place that doesn't explain itself. By the time we reach these later episodes, though, that phase is over. We are nowhere close to done, but damn if we aren't battle-weary already. Episodes 21 through 40 are where the campaign really gets its legs, starts asking harder questions about loyalty, about survival, about what each of these characters we play is actually willing to carry. Plans begin to form, lines get crossed, certain doors close very firmly, and others open in ways that are concerning. So, summing up, this recap isn't here to replace the show. It's here to orient you, to remind you what's in motion, what's unresolved, and what's already slipping out of reach. Okay, a little bit of a prologue. Let's talk about how things stopped being simple. The Frostbourne story, still in progress, mind you, takes place on the continent of Elara, which has been locked in an endless winter for over a century. Not just a bad season or a curse people are waiting out. This is, from what anyone can tell, a permanent condition. It was unleashed when a black dragon named Aruthamar lost everything she was trying to build and decided the world could just freeze with her. Cities survived by adapting in ways that made sense at the time and feel questionable now. Winterhaven, for example, sealed itself under a magical dome. Aubrey wrapped piety around violence and called it order, and on and on and on. The rest of Nythera learned to live cold, desperate, and alert. So that's the board we're playing on, so to speak, and our party didn't stumble into it or even into each other. Instead, they were assembled. First, Loghryn Cragborn, a disgraced dwarven marshal whose clan, the Cragborns, were scapegoated and cast out after a political coup in the heavily fortified Stone Sunder Mountain. He didn't leave as a young dwarf to wander. He left to fix it, slowly, methodically, with a plan that takes decades instead of standard hack-and-slash heroics. Second, Nythera Rhyelith, a 150-something-year-old elf rogue, really an assassin, but let's be real. She's nothing if not precision and restraint. Someone who knows exactly how much damage she can do and chooses carefully when to use it. She's the reason bad situations don't spiral faster for the group than they already do. Third, Chimera, the charismatic tiefling warlock. He draws power from a demonic fiend named Kolgoth, a presence that never really leaves the room. Their relationship is not just spooky flavor. It's more of spooky toxic relationship that Chimera swears up and down is totally fine. It is not. Kolgoth has Chimera's best interests at heart and often goes out of his way to fix situations because of it. But he expects things in return. And everyone in the group knows deep down that this arrangement has an eventual cost. And then there's Ruby, my character. She's a half-orc with bright red hair and a bowler hat and gadgets everywhere. She is curiosity and chaos with a wrench in one hand and a bad idea in the other. If something is dangerous, mysterious, or clearly labeled "do not touch," she's not just interested, it's too late. She's already touching it. Sometimes that makes things worse. Sometimes it's the only reason anyone survives. So that's us. Early on in our story, the group left Winterhaven's dome and claimed a ruined fort in the wilderness. Fort Frostbourne isn't impressive, but it matters. People move in. Families depend on it. And of course, that means we had to get out of there before things got comfortable. And threaded through all of this and the rest of our story is what we'll just call Loghryn's plan. Loghryn has been collecting specific components, rare metals, monster parts, impossible materials, not for wealth and not for power. It's all part of the end game of his master plan. Build an artifact designed to enter dreams. Why? Well, specifically, the dreams of someone called Nythera Stonesunder. She's the rightful dwarven ruler, trapped in a magical coma while a questionable usurper sits on the throne. The story goes, if Loghryn can reach her, wake her, and convince her to abdicate, the political lie that destroyed his clan collapses. No war, no siege, no blood, just the truth delivered at the only place it can't be intercepted. So that's the goal. That's what all these errands, travel, and risk are bent toward. Along the way, the party makes a consistent, dangerous choice. They don't take the easy exit. They spare people. They intervene. They take responsibility. That's how they end up escorting 4 teenagers from the northern city of Aubrey, Chet, Vetty, Aura, and Baz, out into the frozen wilds instead of leaving them to be erased by the city. It's also how one of those kids nearly dies, how they're forced to choose between cutting losses and doubling down, and how the party learns what it actually means to let others follow in your footsteps. Along the way, we also find things we shouldn't. A slaughtered caravan, a sealed box, a warning that is very clear and very ignored. Inside it, something ancient, vampiric enough that even Kolgoth is afraid. The group doesn't destroy it, they bury it, collapse a mountain on top of it, and walk away knowing full well that this is a delay, not a solution. We're very good at the somebody else's problem thing. So, by the end of episode 20, the party has reached Esterholt, a functioning city warmer than most and deeply important going forward. It's a place where vampires have a legal district, where information moves faster than caravans, and where Loghryn finally lays his plan fully on the table for a few other folks, including you, our loyal listeners. The kids are left there for safety. Supplies are secured. Guides are hired. The next step of the plan, acquiring some valuable and incredibly hard-to-find adamantine in the mountains, awaits. So that is where we begin. So, we have a world that is not particularly forgiving, a plan that can't fail quietly, an artifact that isn't finished yet, and a group of people who keep choosing a harder path even when they know better. So if you're jumping in here, I think you're ready. Let's talk about what happens next. So in Esterholt, we packed up our supplies, we made plans with the squirrely Quickbolt brothers, Jesse and Austin, to meet us in the mountains for an introduction to the Duergar. The Duergar keep to themselves, they're reclusive, focused on their work, whatever that is, with a reputation for being kind of particular. That's fine. But we needed some of their adamantine for our bigger plans. Asking the pretty much closed-up Duergar was the most straightforward way to make that happen. So we finally left Esterholt. First, the kids. That was handled. Beds, food, loose supervision, and just enough advice to hopefully keep them from immediately reinventing crime as a lifestyle choice. Ruby showed off her new loyalty tattoo from the potion shop, which Loghryn processed the way a dwarf processes any unexpected information. Did you join a gang? Worse, Ruby said. 20% off, though. And honestly, that tracked. Then we headed for the gates, and on the way out, Esterholt reminded us why leaving felt like the right call. The guards just felt tense. It kind of dawned on us that the paladins in the city were split into two very uncomfortable-looking groups who definitely had opinions about each other and were definitely not discussing them calmly. Nobody was fighting, nobody was moving either, but the city had that about-to-boil-over feeling, and we noticed it. Once we were out past the walls, things got simpler, but in a more treacherous way, the way mountains do. We were plodding our way through the foothills, looking for a place to camp, when Chimera slipped. Not dramatically, nothing crazy, he just slipped. But he didn't hit the ground. 1 second he was there, the next second, from everybody else's point of view, he was gone. No slide, no body, no sound, just absence. No Chimera. Nythera felt it immediately. A shimmer, kind of like that heat haze on a tarmac or on a road, except it was winter and there was absolutely no reason for that to exist. She named it quickly from what the elves call it, the Feywild. Now, you should know, in official Therian lore, this is the first time in the show we've seen the Fey, so, pretty cool. Okay, on the other side of that tear, Chimera in the Feywild landed in a meadow that looked like someone had cranked the color saturation until it broke. Purple grass, the air was way too warm, trees that felt like they were watching him, and Chimera, being Chimera, decided to poke around, start picking things up. Fruit, mushrooms, grass, completely normal behavior. That's when Kolgoth showed up. Cold, shadowy hands creeping over Chimera's shoulders, nails digging in enough to remind him who's in charge. The message was simple, however. Chimera was behind on some debts. 48 hours, Kolgoth told him. 1 sentient life. Death or servitude. Chimera had no choice. He agreed. There wasn't really another option. Then the Feywild itself woke up a little. Something big moved above him. Tentacles, branches tearing, the sound of glass breaking, and Chimera immediately decided it was time to leave. His solution was to blast the ground and try to launch himself back through the tear, which almost worked. On our side, we got a brief, unforgettable glimpse of Chimera flickering into existence, but mostly a glimmer of his oh-so-perfect ass, before he snapped back out again. Glimmer of ass should have been the name of this episode. Anyway, Kolgoth pulled him the rest of the way through a moment later with just a touch of some brief shadowy wings all the way back to us. Chimera hit the snow hard, alive, breathing, and very much not okay. Nythera checked him immediately. Ruby hovered. Loghryn looked relieved. We marked that tear. Maps, notes, landmarks, whatever we could do, because none of us wanted to accidentally find it again, or, in fact, find it again if we really needed to. And then the Feywild made one last attempt. A tentacle snapped through and grabbed Chimera. Nythera cut it clean. Yellow goo spilled out onto the snow. And the snow answered. Dead climbers from ages past pulled themselves up fast and angry, like the mountain itself had decided to get involved. The fight was quick and ugly. Loghryn took a hit that hurt. Ruby shot on instinct. Chimera threw fire like he was still half somewhere else. Nythera killed a couple of them, and then didn't let them stay dead, thanks to some fun from a magic dagger she has. So imagine this: purple flame, dead eyes, obedient, necromantic. We finished the fight standing in the snow with a couple of borrowed corpses on a short leash and a lot of questions we did not have time for. Because that's when we saw a torch and 2 tall, horned figures walking towards us through the dark. This was how the mountains said hello. Okay, so out of that dark came 2 silhouettes. Big ones. Horns. Snow kicking up around their legs like they owned the place. Nythera was the only one who clocked it clearly at first. Chalk it up to elven eyes, I guess. She squinted, paused, and calmly informed the rest of us that there were just 2 minotaurs approaching with weapons drawn. Chimera, meanwhile, was distracted by a severed Feywild tentacle. This is important. Before anyone could argue about strategy, however, Loghryn did what Loghryn always does when facing a potentially violent situation. He walked forward and tried to hire it. Do you want a job? Shockingly, this worked. The Minotaurs didn't charge. They didn't fire the cannon one of them was carrying, like under his arm. They stopped, looked at Loghryn, and decided maybe this weirdo dwarf had some confidence worth listening to. Alright, so we learned their names, Dozer and Brax. Diplomats, technically, sent ahead by the Minotaurs of Ebony Harbor. That's on the northwest coast of the continent. Historically, it's a center for Minotaurs. Anyway, totally unrelated to anything we were up to, they were sent to meet with the Duergar themselves as well about a potential alliance and also some very valuable adamantine. Coincidence. That meeting, it turned out, had gone badly. The Duergar leader they'd spoken to was, how'd they put it? Off. Flat. Empty. Like someone reading lines without understanding the words. Enough to set off alarm bells even for Minotaurs, who are not generally known for subtle vibes-based analysis. So this got our attention. Loghryn in particular was doing that thing where he asks perfectly reasonable questions that slowly made them realize they didn't actually have a plan. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, Chimera offered the Minotaurs a taste of some freshly cooked, severed Feywild tentacle. I wish I was joking. Dozer ate it, though, chewed very thoughtfully. Ruby tried it too, for science. Ruby will eat anything once, let me tell you. All of this, inexplicably, but maybe not, kind of bonded everybody. We made camp together, and that's when Chimera tried to be helpful, making some small talk. Remember, though, he's kind of in a bit of a bind with Kolgoth, and the heat has been rising. He suggested very badly that there were ways to give people magic if they wanted it badly enough. He didn't phrase it very well at all. It came off less interesting opportunity and more deeply insulting accusation involving somebody's mother. The temperature dropped. The Minotaurs bristled, and Chimera, to his credit, immediately realized he had messed up. What followed was the most stressful campfire conversation imaginable. Chimera scrambling to walk it back, Loghryn quietly intervening, and Nythera redirecting one Minotaur's attention to the cannon, which promptly went off with a deafening blast that nearly sent Ruby into a combat crouch, just on reflex. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, mostly. Later, Loghryn pulled Chimera aside. And this is where things kind of got serious, but in a quiet and worrying way. Chimera laid out the truth. Kolgoth wanted a life. 48 hours. No extensions promised. No loopholes obvious. The tarot cards he was using spelled it out to Loghryn bluntly. Help. Loghryn didn't hesitate. Whatever was coming, Chimera wasn't facing it alone. Before anyone could spiral too hard, we were interrupted by the quick bolts, Jesse and Austin, our contacts, arriving early and out of breath. They confirmed exactly what the Minotaurs had felt. Something was very wrong inside the Duergar stronghold. The leader wasn't himself. The whole place felt controlled, like mind control, possession, something worse. That left us with a choice. Walk away, or walk straight into a mountain full of armed Duergar who might not be acting of their own free will. Naturally, we chose the second option. The Minotaurs agreed to come with us. Not even as hired muscle, really. Not even as allies. Just to see what was really going on. We went to sleep knowing 3 things. The Duergar had adamantine. Something was controlling them. And Chimera's clock was ticking. No pressure. All right, let me be clear about one thing up front. We did not sneak in. That decision was made very quickly. When your party consists of 2 minotaurs, 2 humans, a dwarf in full stone armor, an elf, a half-orc with guns, and a warlock who absolutely cannot be trusted near industrial magic, stealth is more of a vibe than a plan. And Nythera's undead. Remember them? They were still technically helping, but increasingly a liability from a public relations standpoint. So we walk straight up to the front doors of the Duergar stronghold. And let me tell you, those doors were serious. Massive, blast door thick slabs of metal worked directly into the mountain. The kind of doors that don't open unless everyone involved agrees it's happening. We explained who we were, who sent us, and after some discussion, the guards led us inside, on the condition that Nythera's undead climbing assistants stayed outside, which, fair. Nythera tried to be responsible about it, gave them simple instructions. Go to the other side of the valley and wait. Spoiler, we still have absolutely no idea if they're still there or not. Probably. Anyway. Inside the mountain, the vibe shifted immediately. The Duergar stronghold was not ornate. It wasn't proud. It wasn't even ugly in a fun way. It was efficient. Flat walls, perfect angles, identical corridors, everything labeled, cataloged, optimized. We passed storage halls stacked with ore and gems, transport lines running constantly, and workers who barely looked up as we passed. Not because they didn't care, but because whatever they were doing mattered way more than us. We entered the forge levels, and the temperature spiked so hard it felt like we'd walked into a kiln. And then we smelled it. Loghryn caught it first. Something metallic, rich, and also wrong. Not iron, not steel, something far more rare, something valuable. Adamantite. Not just present either, but actively being refined, and not in small amounts. We found the furnaces, massive industrial machines pouring molten, arcane-infused adamantite into enormous ingots that shimmered with magical energy even after it cooled. This wasn't just rare, it was dangerous, the kind of thing that could outfit armies or even end them. Chimera realized something else. The furnaces vented magical byproduct, I guess you'd call it, arcane runoff, basically. So Chimera, in a moment that surprised no one who knows him, stepped directly into that cloud and huffed it. He breathed it in. His eyes lit up. Magic flared visibly around him. His senses sharpened to this absurd degree. He could see magic now. Not spells, but people, auras, corruption, even traces of arcane poisoning in the Duergar workers from long-term exposure. He was, for lack of a better term, magically high out of his mind. Also, terrifyingly powerful, but we'll get to that. Kolgoth showed up immediately, delighted, of course, approving, and absolutely not helping. Ruby recognized the signs instantly and did what she always does when Chimera starts vibrating at the frequency of catastrophe. She tried to ground him. Water, physical contact, gentle steering away from the vents. Before that, though, Chimera managed to bottle some of that arcane gas into some small vials. He was obsessed. This is all going to matter later, trust me. In fact, this whole drunk off of power enough that I could punch a god stuff keeps kind of coming back up, and eventually comes to a head to some degree, so just keep an eye out on this storyline. Eventually, the Quickbolts, Jesse and Austin, insisted we leave the forge levels before Chimera ascended into something unclassifiable. We made our way deeper into the mountain, past uniform living quarters, identical bunks, identical rooms, until we reached the throne room, which we had been invited to. And that's where things broke. The king, and yes, I'm doing air quotes, sat alone. No guards, no advisors, no movement, just staring, unblinking. Immediately wrong, right? Chimera could see it plain as day. That wasn't a person. It was a construct. It was an illusion, something pretending very badly to be alive. Ruby found a lever built into the floor, subtle, modular, kind of hidden in plain sight, and without hesitation, she lunged for it, pulled it. Something had to be done. The illusion tore itself apart mid-sentence. The throne sank, the wall behind it split open, and there, bathed in raw, arcane runoff, stood the real Duergar king. Hands submerged in this liquid magic, eyes glowing, body barely holding together everything under the strain. And he turned, and he screamed, "I said I did not want to be interrupted." And that's where we stopped for the evening, because whatever that was, it was not a conversation anymore. So, roll for initiative. Okay, ultimately, turns out the screaming arcane-soaked Duergar king was not interested in a calm discussion. Shocking, I know. First, though, at this point in our story, it was, in a meta way, level up time for us, because Jason looked at the impending throne room bloodbath and went, you know what would help? An extra attack or two. Thanks, man. So Ruby got beefier, some extra range for some crits, Nythera becomes even harder to surprise, and overall still refuses to be breakable. Chimera gets Fireball, the pinnacle of D&D, and becomes the party's new OSHA violation. More on that in a minute. Loghryn, of course, gets a bigger command aura, some boons for friends, and starts picking wrestling moves like he's building Stone Sunder's first combat sports league. Hey, this guy's got plans within plans, so who knows? Anyway, so we go right back to where we left off. Fight. We barely had time to process what we were looking at before things escalated. The king was standing in raw magical runoff like it was a hot tub. Eyes were glowing, skin cracked with power. Absolutely furious that anyone had dared interrupt his... whatever this was. Chimera, riding the absolute peak of his magical high, tried something genuinely reasonable for once. He cast a suggestion. Just a gentle, hey, maybe calm down, let's talk. Bad rolls, didn't work. The king was basically immune to charm effects, immune to poison, immune to reason, and very much immune to the idea of this ending peacefully. So, yeah, initiative, combat started. Now, let me be clear. This fight began as 11 versus 1. Now, there's some other guards and stuff in the room as well, and yet it still immediately felt dangerous. Ruby opened with a shot that absolutely should have ended a normal fight. Clean hit, brutal damage, and the king barely reacted. That's when everybody realized, oh, we're in trouble. Anyway, Nythera immediately pivoted to non-lethal please mode and coated arrows with knockout poison. We're fighting a king. We don't want to look bad here. We're actually just trying to, survive, right? Unfortunately, the king was immune to that too, because of course he was. Then, Chimera, high on whatever, cut loose. And when I say cut loose, I mean he turned himself into a walking arcane disaster. He cast Fireball, right there inside the mountain. It detonated like a god sneezing. Flames, shockwaves, stone glowing red hot, and Chimera, glowing, hovering slightly off the ground, looked like he just discovered religion, and it was arson. The king took it. Burned, cracked, glowed brighter underneath. Still standing, though. That's when the Minotaurs charged. Dozer went in first. Horns down, pure fury, and for a moment it looked like it worked. The king staggered. Then the king kicked him. Thunder followed the impact. Dozer was blasted across the room, bloodied instantly. And a moment later, he was dead. That was the moment the fight stopped being tactical and became personal, because the Minotaur friend Brax lost it. But before that could fully land, Loghryn stepped up, shield planted, calm as stone, and did the most Loghryn thing imaginable. The king swung his massive warhammer at Loghryn, and he missed. Loghryn caught it out of midair, disarmed the king, ripped the hammer free, and without hesitation smashed him with his own weapon, channeling the king's magic right back into him. It was one of those moments, we all went silent because there was absolutely nothing to say except, that actually tracks. Ruby followed it up by launching herself off Loghryn's shield, punching the king midair, and hitting him with enough force to make the mountain rethink its choices. Chimera wasn't done. He threw another fireball. At this point, Ruby physically shoved him away afterward, okay, that's enough spells for one lifetime, because the king was visibly coming apart. His skin burned away to reveal raw, radioactive, arcane energy. And yet, the king snapped back with pure rage. He slammed the ground, shattering stone in a straight line that caught Loghryn, Ruby, and Dozer's already fallen body. And that was it for Dozer. Completely gone. The room went quiet for half a second, and then Brax charged. No strategy, no restraint, just grief and momentum. He gored the king straight through the chest, lifted him off the ground, shook him violently, and slammed his body down in a broken heap. The magic poured out of the king like steam from a ruptured boiler, and then he was dead. All right, the aftermath. 2 guards lay dead. 1 Minotaur dead. The throne room destroyed. Arcane runoff still flowing through channels in the floor. And standing there stunned was Rhyelith, one of the Duergar leaders that joined us, realizing all at once that, first, the king she knew had been gone. 2, the thing ruling them wasn't him. And 3, the solution had been this. Loghryn did what he always does in moments like this. He took responsibility. He apologized, not because it was his fault, but because someone had to say the words. He asked what could be done now. How can we help? Rhyelith ordered everyone out of the room immediately, away from the magic, away from the body, away from whatever influence had poisoned the king. Brax, shaking and furious, finally let Nythera pull him away from the corpse. And Chimera was still glowing, still high, still very much not done paying the price for whatever he had inhaled. But that was a problem for later. For now, the Duergar had no king, and the mountain was very, very quiet. After the whole oops, we killed a king inside his own mountain situation, we didn't immediately get thrown into Duergar jail, believe it or not. Rhyelith, the Duergar magic wielder who helped during the fight, was clearly in shock. Her guards were dead, the throne room was basically a crime scene / blast furnace, and the king had been turned into a tragic, cautionary tale. Ruby, being Ruby, quietly went over to Dozer's body and collected his broken horns. Not as a trophy, not as a weird goblet project, just a thing that mattered. Like, we need to honor this. Rhyelith pulled us out of the throne room fast, and then came the big question. How do we explain what just happened? Loghryn laid it out carefully, because if anybody could sell, we accidentally walked into a king's arcane meth lab and he exploded, it was him. We explained the whole chain. We came here for adamantine. We were told the king was acting weird. We walked in, discovered the king was acting very weird. We tried to subdue him. He killed people anyway. Brax finished the fight in a grief-fueled hornstorm. Nythera even handed over her knockout poison, oil of Taggett, and said, see, we literally tried the non-lethal option here. He just wasn't having it. So Rhyelith, to her credit, believed us. She didn't even try to spin it. She said the council would investigate, and that for them, leaders are chosen, not born. And the best thing we could do was just stay put until the Duergar sorted out what the hell just happened. With guards that watch you, and you can't leave. But it's not arrest, it's hospitality? Protective? Anyway, sure, very normal. So we got escorted to guest quarters. And then we got a long rest. That's when Chimera's bill came due. Chimera had been huffing arcane refinery runoff like it was a personality trait, and now the universe sent the invoice. Jason rolled on the short-term madness table, and Chimera got basically 6 hours of on and off screaming, just screaming. Ruby stayed with him, trying to help, washcloth, water, the whole deal, because Ruby is Chimera's ride or die, even when the ride is a demonic panic spiral. Loghryn, in full dad mode, quietly removed every remaining vial of that arcane huff nonsense from Chimera's reach. He vanished them, the same way a parent loses a toy that makes a noise. Eventually, Chimera crashed hard, slept like the dead, like deep, weird, heavy sleep. While he was out, Nythera finally shared something she'd been sitting on. She'd been researching demon pacts, specifically how to sever them. This goes back to when she and Ruby were in Aubrey and they had done a little bit of this research in the library. Anyway, she made it very clear to Loghryn that she and Ruby and nobody else should be planning to force anything on Chimera. This was more like a, if he ever asks, there is a way out kind of a thing. And while it hasn't come up yet, I have a feeling this is going to be here in the future. All right, time passed, about 3 days. We weren't locked in a cell, but we weren't free either. Guards outside doors, controlled movement, friendly supervision. It made sense, honestly. Their king was dead. Nythera finally got what she never gets, peace and quiet. She took a bath, read her poisoner's almanac, and stared into space like someone who hadn't had a single uninterrupted thought in months. Ruby, excitedly, got a guided tour of the refinery because the Duergar, despite everything, were still very proud of their work, and she learned something very important. Duergar refine adamantine into these enormous ingots, massive 6 to 8 foot Kit Kat bars kind of metal that weigh hundreds and hundreds of pounds apiece. Meaning, yes, it was valuable, and yeah, we needed it, but also yes, moving it would be a nightmare. Meanwhile, Loghryn and Chimera went to check on the quick bolts. And when they arrived in the brothers' room, they heard shouting because Jesse and Austin were arguing hard about whether to turn us in. Jesse was like, "They killed the king, we're screwed, flip on them." Austin was like, "That's a terrible idea, and also it's not even true." Anyway, Loghryn walked in mid-fight like a tired dad stepping into a room where 2 teenagers were about to throw controllers. He talked Austin down, reframed everything into advantage, and basically said, No, we're in a good position. Don't set it all on fire." Loghryn went to Brax's room with Austin, leaving Jesse behind. That comes up in a minute. Brax was pacing like a caged storm, angry, devastated, and trying to hold himself together through sheer horn-based willpower. Loghryn did something really solid here. He didn't try to erase the anger. He just tried to steer it. Use it effectively. Don't waste it, Brax. Don't get yourself and all of us killed before we even have a chance to do anything with it. And then Loghryn did what Loghryn does best. He pitched a plan. Not attack the mountain, but take the mountain without turning it into ashes and bodies, trying to get Brax on board, and therefore the Minotaurs. Brax didn't fully understand the details, but the idea of no more Minotaurs dying got through, and for once, he wanted something other than revenge. Also, Loghryn casually tried to recruit Austin as a follower, which was hilarious tone shift from "we are suspects in a royal death investigation" to "so anyway, you want a job?" But again, that tracks for Loghryn. Austin, being Austin, immediately negotiated for pay and back pay and asked if this was babysitting, because of course he did. And Loghryn pitched him on a criminal network back in Esterholt, training those young thieves, the teenagers we left behind, building an operation, feeding profit back into the fort. Austin was intrigued in a not "this is my dream," but more of a "I've had a weird week" kind of a way. Now, let's get to Chimera. Chimera, still on a countdown to his sole contract deadline with Kolgoth, decided to do something that at the time seemed like a bad/good idea. He sat down with Jesse to play cards while they were on their own. Naturally, it became a cheating contest. That's fine. It's part of the flavor. Chimera even used minor illusion to mess with the cards. Jesse cheated too. It is basically 2 raccoons trying to steal from each other while smiling politely. And while they played, Kolgoth, Chimera's toxic demon patron, made himself known. Just a little voice in Chimera's head saying, "You're on the clock." And Chimera felt that presence withdraw, like the demon wasn't even mad, just waiting, which is always worse with Kolgoth. Chimera tried to get Jesse interested in power. Not even in a super manipulative way at first, just more like, "You've got potential, you're sharp, you could be so much more." Jesse predictably leaned in like, "Oh, you got something for me?" And Chimera went for it. He offered Jesse a warlock contract. I mean, this is the whole point. Jesse signed immediately. And then everything jumped. Chimera blinked, and suddenly the knife was coated in blood, and Jesse's throat was slit. Jesse was on the floor, dying. Chimera came back to himself just in time to watch the light leave Jesse's eyes and to feel Jesse's soul get pulled into him. And then Kolgoth hit Chimera with the final gut punch. "Never leave me waiting again." And that's where we ended. Now, in meta terms, you have to understand, any game master taking control of a player's character is, well, it's taboo. It's just not done, right? In this case, we had a perfect storm of good stuff happening. I'll go so far as to say that Ian, who plays Chimera, was immediately and absolutely not okay, but so okay with how this played out. Think of this like how Chimera feels with Kolgoth being part of his every waking moment, being watched and manipulated. That part of the story became even more real for all of us in that moment. It was so amazing. After the session, we squealed in delight, let me tell you. It was so good, and Jason was amazing. But yeah, back to Chimera and Jesse, Quickbolt, and Kolgoth. A line got crossed. This was not, "Oops, we killed a king in self-defense." This was a different line, and a clearly worse one. And even if Kolgoth pulled the strings, in effect, and to everyone else, even to himself, Chimera had just stepped over it. Okay, next session, Chimera came back to himself standing over Jesse's body. Just the sudden, horrifying awareness that time had skipped for a few seconds. His knife was wet, and Jesse was dead on the floor in front of him. And Chimera knew immediately what it meant. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't collateral damage. This was Kolgoth reminding him who was in charge. So Chimera did the only thing his brain could latch onto: fix it before anyone sees. He cleaned himself up first, trying to get the blood off of his clothes while Kolgoth talked at him like a motivational speaker from hell, not asking questions, just narrating the panic, enjoying it. Then Chimera slipped out into the hall, smiling at the guards like everything was fine, ducked into the party's room and grabbed Nythera. She just assessed the situation like the professional she is and immediately got to work. Chimera tried to clean the blood with magic and quickly learned that prestidigitation is not, in fact, a crime scene eraser. Now, they needed to move a dead body through a heavily guarded Duergar stronghold. Nythera drank a potion of frost giant strength. And then she drank a potion of invisibility. Boom. Suddenly, Jesse vanished over her shoulder like a deeply unethical magic trick. All right, at the same time, and this part is important, Loghryn was down the hall doing damage control of a completely different kind. He was sitting with the Minotaur Brax and Austin, Jesse's brother, turning grief and rage about this whole Duergar situation into something like a plan. Maybe a changed leadership, maybe a do it without losing anyone else. Then, because this is Loghryn, he decided this conversation required drinks, which meant he left the room. Chimera and Loghryn pass each other at the door in that perfect sitcom timing. Loghryn cheerful, moving fast, carrying booze. Chimera smiling too hard, absolutely not fine. Chimera gave him the tiniest signal possible: not good, stop celebrating. Loghryn clocked it immediately and kept playing it cool. He even invited a guard to join them for a drink because if you're going to commit a crime, you might as well block line of sight while you're at it. Plausible deniability is one of Loghryn's many taglines. Chimera, meanwhile, became the distraction. And honestly, he freaking nailed it. Smiling, polite, curious, asking questions about furnaces and manufacturing like a man who absolutely did not have a corpse being carried invisibly 10 feet behind him. Chimera and Nythera reached the forge floor. This place was a nightmare of efficiency. Massive machines, railings everywhere, safety standards, which frankly felt rude under the circumstances. No open lava pits, no convenient drop-offs, just enormous grinders designed to pulverize ore into nothing. Perfect. That's what we used. Ruby showed up right on cue, mid-tour, genuinely fascinated by the machinery, and immediately realized something was off. Chimera gave her the subtle signal they'd used 100 times before. Nythera's nearby. Don't ask questions. Ruby understood instantly. And she did what she does best. Talked. She asked questions of the guard. She pointed. She gestured. She made a show of being deeply invested in how everything worked while Nythera quietly opened a hatch and tipped Jesse's body into the machine. And then, nothing. The machine kept running. Ore poured in. The evidence vanished. Back in the rooms, everyone regrouped. Chimera finally collapsed into a chair like someone who had been holding himself together with wire and adrenaline and just ran out. Ruby immediately went over to him, the way she always did when things got dark, with her hands, with her voice, grounding him. Chimera told him everything. The ultimatum, the contract, the moment he thought he'd made things right, and the instant Kolgoth took control and proved him wrong. Ruby listened, and then she said the most Ruby thing imaginable. Well, sounds like Jesse dodged a bullet, and told Kolgoth to go fuck himself. No love lost. Loghryn burst in moments later with drinks and the energy of a man who thought the evening had gone great. He took one look at the room, the tension, the frost forming on glasses. Nythera was still invisible, right? And immediately realized it was no longer true. They drank anyway, because sometimes that's all you can do. Chimera told him the bad news first. Jesse was dead. The good news? It was handled, for now. Loghryn processed that in the same way he processed most catastrophes, calmly, practically, without pretending it didn't matter. They talked through what Austin could know, what he couldn't, What story would hold long enough to get them out of the mountain alive? And then they hit the real problem. None of this was over. They were still guests. They were still being watched, still sitting on a pile of secrets that could collapse everything if they slipped. But for that night, the pieces held together, just barely, and it was enough to sleep. The next day opened with the rarest thing we'd had in days. No one actively accusing us of murder, which, given recent events, felt like a win, even if it wasn't true. The Duergar investigation wrapped quietly. Rhyelith even showed up with snacks, which is generally not how people behave when they're about to throw you in a pit. She apologized, genuinely, and then casually told us we were free to go. Loghryn, of course, immediately complicated that by remembering why we'd come in the first place. The Duergar agreed to give us a full bar of adamantite. The bad news? It weighed 900 pounds. Which is the exact moment Ruby Pettigrew stopped bouncing off the walls from cabin fever and instead channeled every ounce of that energy into a single dangerous thought. What if we didn't haul it? What if we built something around it? And thus began the week where everyone else processed trauma, political fallout, and grief, while Ruby and Loghryn invented a vehicle. They worked with the Duergar engineers, who brought brutal precision and an unsettling lack of safety standards to the table. Ruby brought half-remembered gnomish tinkering tricks, focal force spring theory, and the kind of sleep deprivation that unlocks forbidden knowledge. What they built was alarming. An adamantite-framed, forge-core-powered, mountain-climbing engine on wheels. Warm inside, horrifically expensive, no seatbelts, no precedent. Fueled by something halfway between magic and nuclear anxiety. It could push through snow, grip ice, recharge slowly from ambient magic, and, if the forge core ever ruptured, vaporize everyone inside instantly. Ruby called it the Gear Heart. And Ruby, who had not slept in days, stared at it for a long time and said, "I think it's done," then promptly passed out. While the Gear Heart came together, something else quietly unraveled. Austin waited. And waited, and waited. Jesse, his brother, never came back. Eventually, Austin confronted us. Not angrily, just desperately confused. Tired, asking the kind of questions that make your stomach drop because you know the answers and can never say them. That's when Chimera did one of the hardest things he'd done in a long time. And remember, he was just the conduit for Kolgoth killing someone. He lied. He just flat out lied. He told Austin that Jesse had talked about leaving, that he'd found a way out, that he'd cracked under the pressure, that he said Austin could handle this better than he ever could. It was a good lie. Too good, and some good rolls. Austin didn't believe it, not really, but he didn't have proof otherwise, and he had no energy left to fight ghosts. So he packed his things, and he left, which somehow felt worse than if he'd screamed. A few days later, with the Gear Heart finished and Ruby still asleep under a blanket of grease and pride, we were summoned to meet the new ruler of the Duergar, Queen Illyria Ironshade. She didn't ease into the room. She occupied it, scarred, older, sharp-eyed, wearing a plain iron crown like it was a tool, not a symbol. Maps spread across the table, military positions already shifting in her mind. Loghryn bowed. She nodded once, so straight to business. He laid it all out, the coalition, the plan for Stone Sunder, the artifact that would let us confront its last ruler without a siege, no bloodbath, no burned cities, just leverage, timing, and patience. She actually listened, and she asked the only question that mattered. Who gets the mountain when you're done? Loghryn didn't hesitate. Everyone. That answer, more than the artifact, more than the tech, was what convinced her. Illyria agreed to wait. All this Loghryn's plan nonsense, all this crafting an artifact to make things happen, we now have a ticking clock. 4 months. Through the worst of winter, no military action unless we failed to return. In exchange, she wanted the Gearheart designs. Ruby, unconscious and unavailable for comment, was generally outvoted. And if we know Jason, we absolutely know we are going to see the consequences of that in the future. Anyway, hands were shaken, terms were set. As we left, Brax finally asked the obvious question. Did that go well? Loghryn smiled. Perfectly. So we had the metal, we had transportation, we had 4 months before an army moved. For the first time since entering the mountain, it felt like the story had shifted, maybe in our favor. Next, finally, we were heading back to Esterholt. All right, so we finally left the mountain. No fanfare or speeches, just an experimental vehicle, an ingot of adamantite, several unresolved traumas, and Ruby behind the wheel of something she'd built with her bare hands and zero regard for OSHA violations. The Gearheart rolled out of the Black Rock Mountains like a very loud, very expensive bad idea. Ruby drove. Of course she did. The whole thing had been built around her reach, her instincts, her way of thinking. Anyone else in that seat would have looked like a child trying to drive a wagon from inside a wardrobe. It wasn't comfortable at all. Imagine sitting on a church pew strapped to a jackhammer. Every few hours we stopped so Ruby could tighten something, adjust something, or mutter, "Okay, that's not supposed to do that," before making it worse and then better again. But it did work, shockingly well. And we were making time, real time. 10 miles an hour downhill, which in frozen mountain terms is basically flying. And then, due to some random-ass dice rolls on the travel table, it rained blood. Actual, warm, iron-scented blood falling out of the sky. All right, listen, we're called Dungeons and Randomness, so when randomness happens, we roll with it. It's now part of the story, and we suspect very strongly it's going to matter at some point. Loghryn noticed the storm moving east, towards Esterholt. Lightning crackled low and wrong. Something also discharged far off into the mountains. A silent explosion followed seconds later by thunder like the world had punched itself. Meta note, this is in the very clear direction of where the new Astharian gods happen to live. That's another story, but yeah, there's no way this doesn't matter at some point. Loghryn, in his wisdom, suggested we ignore it, which we did briefly, because Esterholt then fired up a flare. And if there's one universal truth across cultures, it's that flares mean something is wrong. What could we do, though? We pushed on. Next day, we're getting close to Esterholt, during a whiteout snowstorm a bit outside the city, and Ruby nearly ran somebody over. She slammed the brakes, turned the steering wheel, and slid. The Gearheart fishtailed, groaned, and stopped inches short of a bundled figure in the snow, bleeding pretty badly, shoulder torn open, barely conscious. Loghryn hopped out with a healing potion and zero patience for excuses. The man's name was Cliff. He'd been hunting near Esterholt. Something had mauled him in the dark. No big deal. Cliff drank the potion, flesh knitting back together with a sound no one enjoyed, and asked immediately the most reasonable question anybody had asked all week. "What is that thing?" pointing at the Gearheart. We offered him a ride. The storm cleared, the road flattened, Cliff dozed, snoring softly, blood drying on his coat, and into the seats of the Gearheart. At the gates of Esterholt, guards gathered, ballistas turned, torches flared. Everyone stared at the Gearheart like it was a dragon that had learned how to parallel park. While Ruby explained, again, that it was basically a wagon just without a horse, Nythera felt something grab her, hard. She was yanked backward, clawed hands clutching her coat, fur slick and clammy. She stabbed on instinct, a hidden blade snapping out, and whatever had grabbed her recoiled with a sound halfway between a scream and a yelp. Then the thing came out. It burst from the Gearheart in a blur of muscle and fur, huge, fast, wrong, and slammed into Chimera, teeth sinking into his chest, claws hammering him into the snow like a rag doll. The guards froze. Nythera struck again, psychic energy tearing into the creature's flank. It let go just long enough for Chimera, bleeding and gasping, to unleash a cone of fire straight into its face. The werewolf screamed. Flames engulfed its head, and it fled, a burning shape tearing off into the dark hills beyond the city. Chimera was hurt, badly, but not dying. Something under his skin had hardened, sealed the wound before it could finish him. Something not human. Kolgoth, of course. Ruby noticed immediately, asked the question no one wanted to hear. "Ask him if you're infected." Chimera checked. Whatever had happened wasn't lycanthropy. It was Kolgoth. Kolgoth is toxic as hell, but he has every motivation to keep Chimera alive. He's just happy enough for Chimera to feed him whatever excess he can muster. But this is a kind of Kolgothing that even Kolgoth hasn't yet Kolgothed up to this point. I promise you this becomes a thing, so keep it in mind. It's just the beginning. Anyway, back to the group at the gates of Esterholt. The guards, understandably alarmed, demanded answers. Loghryn did what he always did, talked calmly, took responsibility, and said not to worry about it, we'll figure it out. Ruby, though, shaking with guilt, punched the side of the Gearhart hard enough to make it ring. She blamed herself for stopping. Nythera told her to stop it. Eventually, the gates opened. The Gearhart rolled into Esterholt, battered, blood-streaked, dented, and absolutely unforgettable. A miracle machine limping home with fresh scars and no good explanation for any of it. Okay, so we're back in Esterholt. Yay! And immediately it felt wrong. Boo. The guards waved us through the gates without much fuss. The werewolf incident got written up as unfortunate but clearly not your fault, which felt generous, especially after all that Durgar King mess, and the Gearhart rolled in looking like it had lost a bar fight with a mountain. Ruby was doing laps between Chimera and the Gearhart like a frantic parent at a playground. Chimera, for his part, was mostly fine. The demonic flare had receded a bit, the horns were a little bit shorter, eyes a little bit less terrifying. Still had a very noticeable demon-scarred hole in his chest, but look, nobody's perfect. We parked the Gearhart near the carriage yards, immediately realized it was melting the snow around it, and Ruby insisted on covering it with some sort of canvas like a nervous pet owner tucking in a dangerous animal. Then we did the most responsible thing possible. We checked back into silk sheets. For those of you who don't recall, it's kind of nice. Amazing rooms, saunas, magical armor and clothes cleaning, minibar, baths, done. That night, the city stayed loud. The kind of noise a city makes when something bad has happened but no one agrees on why or whose fault it is. We slept anyway. We had to. The next morning, over breakfast, we heard some news. A vampire had been murdered, right there in town. Staked clean through the heart. It was public. Central Esterholt. No witnesses, no culprit, and worse, no agreement on who was even in charge of investigating it. Meanwhile, and of course, two different paladin orders were fighting over jurisdiction. The city guard was annoyed at both of them, and a little scared of both of them too. The vampire community was furious, and Nythera clocked immediately that something big was still happening near the city center. Crowds moving the wrong way, people whispering, guards stationed where they normally weren't. Ruby just wanted coffee and pancakes. They'd earned it. Chimera quietly wondered if this had anything to do with the unsettling vampire acquaintance we had made last time we were here. Loghryn, deeply tired already, made the executive decision to focus on one problem at a time. Problem number one, the kids. We'd left them in Esterholt to get their bearings, set up shop, do some reconnaissance about this crazy list of components we needed to wrangle, and again, now in the next 4 months. We headed for the safe house where we thought they'd been staying. And yeah, that didn't go great. The place had been abandoned for at least a week. No food, no signs of recent life. And then there was blood. On the mattress. Old, dried. Not enough to mean someone died there, but enough to mean someone had been hurt. Pretty badly. Nythera confirmed it. We split up across the city, asking questions about the kids. Potion shops, street contacts, guards, anyone who might have seen an 8-year-old Goliath recently. Because subtlety is hard when you're 8 feet tall, right, Baz? The answer kept coming back the same. Yeah, they'd been around, and yeah, they'd been asking questions, and then nothing. No one had seen them leave the city, which meant either they'd had enough and left town to probably just freeze to death somewhere, or they were still here and very good at hiding now. By late afternoon, Loghryn was officially having a day trademark. While the Gearhart stayed underneath a tarp, we hired a carriage to cross town. And that's when Nythera spotted something important. Someone armed, heavily armed, slipping into the kids' old safe house. We ditched the carriage mid-complaint, paid too much, and followed. Inside, we found a monster hunter. Polite, annoying, armed to the teeth, crossbow, blades, greatsword. The kind of guy who introduces himself like he expects you to already know the name. Weirdly charming or weirdly off-putting, depending on who you are. Thane Silverfox. He claimed he was tracking a werewolf, suggested there might be more than one in the city, casually admitted he was hoping for a payout. The exchange went nowhere productive in the moment, but we did learn a few things. The blood in the safe house likely belonged to a werewolf. The kids probably weren't there when it happened, and Esterholt might have multiple monsters loose right now. Thane left, promising we'd run into each other again, which is never something you want to hear said casually. With daylight gone and patience exhausted, we finally went where we should have gone hours ago. Bonzo's Dark, because where's a better place to collect your thoughts after a long road trip where you've helped murder a king, install another, create a new type of machinery that is likely going to change the face of Theria, and set a werewolf on fire, but a noisy, saturated theme restaurant in the vampire district of Esterholt. And guess what? There they were, all 4 kids, alive, laughing, dancing, surrounded by vampires like this was the most normal night of their lives. Everybody looked fine. Mostly, except Chet. It's always Chet. Chet looked paler than usual. So the good news was the kids were alive. The weird news was they were alive at Bonzo's Dark. Loghryn didn't yell, which honestly might have been more unsettling than if he had. He just sighed this long, world-weary sigh of a man realizing this conversation was going to take a while, and we got a booth. Ruby did what Ruby always does when emotionally overwhelmed, ordered aggressively. Harpy knuckles, something on fire, something sweet enough to peel paint, and then stared into the middle distance like her brain had filed for vacation without telling anybody else. Chimera just watched the kids for a while, not judging, not planning, just relieved, which, given the last few days, felt earned. And then there was Chet. There's always a Chet factor. Paler than usual, not needs a nap pale, Vampire District pale, the kind of pale that comes with follow-up questions. Once everybody had food, the kids finally sat down and told us what happened. Short version, someone had tried to assassinate the man they were staying with. Chet, inadvertently, got stabbed. Clerics, not very helpful. A vampire stepped in, and now Chet was in between, not fully dead, not fully undead, a thrall, a temporary solution with a ticking clock. And to their credit, the kids handled it. They made decisions and they survived. They didn't spiral, which meant nobody had to yell. Nythera asked if he was okay now, and Ruby reassured him in the most Ruby way possible. We fixed worse. You're not a problem. You're just on the list. Loghryn listened quietly. He didn't approve. He didn't disapprove. He just took it all in, clocked the timeline, and mentally added, figure out vampire politics to an already terrifying to-do list. Then the kids dropped one more thing. They'd made contacts, vampire contacts, potential allies, fighters, scouts, people who wanted out of Esterholt and into something bigger. Loghryn didn't say yes, but he didn't say no, which is basically a glowing endorsement. Somewhere in there, it also came out that the kids had made a lot of money while we were gone, enough that several nearby vampires suddenly paid very close attention, which prompted a quiet, immediate decision that it was time to wrap it up before somebody got any ideas. Ice cream arrived, fang-shaped, Bonzo specialty, bills were paid, promises were made to talk the next day. Everybody went back to their rooms carrying equal parts relief and exhaustion. Later that night, with Loghryn and Nythera in one room and Ruby and Chimera in the next, Nythera told Loghryn, the vampire who'd been murdered in the street, she'd known him closely. And no one was investigating. Loghryn didn't argue. He just said, then we will. And he meant it. In the other room, Ruby soaked in a bath, letting the noise drain out of her bones, while Chimera stayed nearby, not fixing anything or pushing, just being there, which it turned out was exactly what they all needed. Tomorrow was going to be busy, political, messy, dangerous. But for one night, everybody was alive and fed, and nobody had to make another impossible decision until morning. Morning came the way it always does after a long night in Esterholt. Too early, too bright, and already making demands. Ruby peeled herself out of bed long enough to ask Loghryn for some time alone with the Gearheart to fix things up. Now, this begins a little story arc where the party actually splits up. Not by design, mind you. This is genuinely what our characters would be doing. From a story point of view, the next few episodes, so good. Such an amazing story, the way it all weaves together. Again, and I'm not paid to say this, but goddamn if Jason isn't a genius. Anyway, Loghryn, Nythera, and Chimera headed across town to the Gloaming Quarter, armored, alert, and already tired. Halfway there, a body hit their carriage. Because of course it did. A man with his throat torn out slid off of a roof and hit the street in a spray of blood, followed shortly by Thane Silverfox, monster hunter, crowd pleaser, and walking public execution. He tested the blood after killing the man, confirmed it was a werewolf, bowed to the crowd, accepted applause, and casually paid for the carriage damage like this was all part of the day's work. They parted ways, but not without Silver Fox making it very clear he was open to being found later winking at Chimera. A little too open, honestly, but hey, what's all this insanity without a little flirtation in the mix? Okay, here's where we start playing table tennis with the story a little bit. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, near the gates, Ruby reached the Gearheart, ready to unpack her tools, roll up her sleeves, and get to work making this thing roadworthy again. And froze. Remember, this had been torn to shreds inside by a werewolf. Lots of blood, lots of bent metal, leather straps that needed repairing. But it wasn't damaged, and it wasn't needing repair. She looked the whole thing over, inside and out, and it was perfect. Cleaned, polished, reupholstered even. Tightened, improved. The forge core completely secure. The blood all gone, the dents erased. Someone had spent weeks of skilled labor restoring it while it sat under a tarp in a guarded lot. Except it hadn't been weeks. It had only been a few hours. Ruby stared at it in silence, went through every possible explanation, rejected all of them, and did the only sane thing left. She started upgrading it anyway. If someone was going to mess with her machine, then fine. She'd make sure it was hers. Storage, warmth, hooks, rails, levers, mystery switches labeled things like more, less, light 'em up. Some worked, some would someday. All of them felt right. Ruby went all out thanks to some insane engineering checks. So, score. Back in the gloaming quarter, though, the rest of the group arrived at the massive Gothic church where the kids had been staying and immediately walked into vampire politics. Two factions, one pushing for representation and reform, another quietly talking about purification and destiny. Neither subtle, both very intense. They met Aveline Duskward, leader of the more reasonable faction, who offered help, protection, and diplomacy, not conquest. Loghryn was clear in return. No war, no promises, no violence. If Stone Sunder fell, it would be clean. That earned trust. She asked one thing in return. Investigate the murder of one of their own, a murder no one else in the city was allowed to touch. Loghryn agreed. Hey, we were already going to do that. 24 hours, maybe 48. And in thanks, she handed him a centuries-old bottle of dwarven ale, the kind you don't give unless it matters. She also very politely asked him not to meet the other vampires. They took the hint, and they left through a hidden passage. Then Aura caught up with Chimera. Those two have a connection. It's really sweet. Turns out she did a great job recruiting potential warlock candidates, just like Chimera had asked before we left for the mountains. She kind of did too good. One group wanted a demonstration to prove Chimera wasn't a charlatan. Another wanted a trial by combat, specifically to the death. Also, she'd taken 15,000 gold from them. Chimera blinked. Loghryn pinched the bridge of his nose. Nythera reached for her daggers, and just as Ruby, on the other side of Esterholt, noticed guards sprinting towards the front gate, the horns sounded. She bounded up, asked what in the ever-loving heck was going on. No big deal. A Minotaur army stood outside the city's walls, all at once. Well, at the gates, Ruby heard the rumors first. 40 or 50 Minotaurs stood outside the walls, not charging or negotiating, just standing there, enough to make the guards nervous. Well, Ruby did what Ruby does when something feels wrong but hasn't exploded yet. She tightened bolts, rerouted power, and made sure the Gearheart could move if it needed to. So she worked quietly, making sure this miracle machine didn't become a tomb at some point. Meanwhile, the rest of the party were navigating the streets when Aura came running up with that tone in her voice that meant this was not great news. That gang she'd recruited for Chimera, they were looking for him right now with murder in mind. They'd just worked themselves up into a frenzy for some reason. Chimera, to his credit, didn't panic. He disguised himself into a very handsome, completely normal human man. No horns, no tail, no red skin, just a guy named, apparently, Gilgamesh? Anyway, Nythera peeled off with Veti to investigate Zira's house. Now, Zira, of course, is this vampire who had been killed. Inside, the place was too clean, freshly dusted, meticulous, like someone had erased a crime instead of living there. And then they found a hidden compartment and found what they needed. Zira had been watching Thane Silverfox. Notes, dates, patterns, enough to suggest Silverfox didn't just hunt monsters, he showed up after the fact. Bodies already dead, lycanthropy appearing post-mortem, and in one case, a supposed victim later seen alive outside the city. The possibility just hung there. Silverfox might not be hunting monsters. He might just be very good at killing people and writing the story afterward. Back on the streets, the gang found Chimera. 9 guys, loud, mean, proudly stupid. They were convinced Chimera had a demon inside of him and that beating him to death would grant them power. I mean, they're only half right. Loghryn stepped in front of Chimera without hesitation. Shield planted, options offered calmly. Leave, fight him, or make things much worse. They chose violence. Okay, that's when Chimera decided to talk. He explained, listen, killing him is not going to grant them power. That's not how it works. Also, he was hard to kill. Even if they succeeded, most of them would die in the process. Lose, lose. So he offered them a test. Let him choose the strongest among them. Give that one a taste of power. Then they fight each other. Last one standing proves who deserves it. Kolgoth loved the idea. Aura loved it even more. She suggested contracts, waivers, everybody signs. Anyone who dies forfeits their soul cleanly. No ambiguity. Chimera should have stopped this, but he didn't. After a very brief and deeply stupid conference, the gang agreed. They escorted us toward a dive bar ready to formalize the deal. So at this point, Esterhold is feeling less like a city and more like a collection of unrelated, unresolved fires we were politely pretending weren't connected. Ruby was alone with the Gearheart, tools out, mind locked in. She reinforced, rebalanced, made sure the forge core wasn't one bad pothole away from turning the street into a crater. The thing was stable, too stable, almost like it had been helping itself. Ruby did not love that thought, but there were some bad rolls and she had no idea what was going on. While she worked, 40 or 50 Minotaurs were escorted straight through the gates, armed, calm, almost like a parade, heading toward the city center like they had an appointment. Both Paladin factions mobilized. Ruby filed it away for Loghryn. Elsewhere, Chimera had turned a basement under the worst bar in town into a fight pit. Violent idiots signed magical waivers and beat each other for the chance at warlock power. Loghryn hated every second. He ushered the kids out like a tired dad removing children from a cursed carnival. Aura stayed behind, though, hurt, defensive, convinced she'd found something she was good at. Chimera leaned into showman mode. Each round fed him more power, literally soul by soul. And then the realization hit. This wasn't fun anymore. This was actually dangerous. Above ground, Nythera confirmed what she suspected as she moved closer and closer to Ruby's side of the city. Thane Silverfox wasn't just suspicious, he was very likely a murderer. Silverfox made his move anyway. Close to the Gearheart, Chet got shot. A crossbow bolt laced with something nasty hit his shoulder. Ruby tackled him out of the way and realized this wasn't a warning, it was an execution attempt. Nythera spotted Silverfox on the rooftops and took off. Icy tiles, sliding jumps, one perfectly thrown dagger that sent him tumbling through a roof. He got away, but not clean. Back in the basement on the other side of town, the final fight ended. The power surged. Chimera lost control. He grew, changed. The room went from violent to apocalyptic in seconds. Someone hit him with a pool cue. He responded by turning the room into a slaughterhouse. Loghryn didn't hesitate. He sent Aura away immediately, grabbed his shield, and walked down the stairs toward the monster Chimera had become. No shouting, no speeches, just one clear message. Enough. And that's basically where we ended the session. Nythera hunting a killer, Ruby stabilizing a bleeding kid beside a machine that might be alive, I don't know, Aura running from the consequences of her own success, and Loghryn standing between his friend and what he turned into. Next session, we picked up with no one okay. In the basement, Loghryn stood alone with what used to be Chimera and was now an infernal problem wearing his friend's face. Bodies everywhere. blood in the floorboards. Chimera wasn't gone. He was inside something louder and hungrier. Kolgoth himself wasn't even steering anymore. Loghryn tried words. They failed. So he planted his shield, racked his shotgun, and fired twice. Chimera took the hit, stood back up, heated the weapon until Loghryn had to drop it, and teleported up the stairs in a flash of fire. A hand axe followed him. Listen, the basement began to come apart. Across the city, Nythera did something she hasn't done in a very long time. She put on her Raven mask, the one that gave her a nickname, Raven's Breath. Shadows bent. Her voice went colder. She followed Thane Silverfox into a dark kitchen and told him she was done pretending. He shot first, missed. Nythera answered with poison steel and a pot of boiling soup to the face. He ran. Ruby arrived just in time to tackle him straight through a wooden fence and into the street. Guards drew weapons. Nythera stepped from the shadows, darkness whispering, "Kill him, kill him, kill him, kill him." And then the Gearheart roared to life. Only Ruby heard it, but unmistakable, and faster than it ever had traveled. It tore into the night, driven by two unsupervised children who absolutely did not have permission. Back in the basement of Grizzlebits, Loghryn and Chimera were chest to chest in the wreckage. Chimera, patron saturated and furious, insisted this was what Loghryn wanted all along. Loghryn did not agree. He climbed Chimera, grabbed horn and jaw, and tried to end it with a hatchet. Not end Chimera exactly, just the situation. The horn cracked. Something molten showed underneath. Chimera laughed. He clawed Loghryn's armor, leaving a mark that felt like a signature, then tried to escape through the door, where Aura was holding the other side and realizing she was in way over her head. What Loghryn was looking at was something close to a greater demon, and we need a greater demon horn as one of our components. Meanwhile, and this is connected, trust me, Vedi drove the Gearheart across half of Esterholt at speeds no one consented to, all to get Chet some help urgently from people she trusted back in the Gloaming Quarter. Vendors fled, walls scraped, Ched bled in the passenger seat, and interestingly, the Gearheart actually picked up a bit of speed at that point. Anyway, then right on cue, the Gearheart blasted through the wall of the basement of Grizzlebits. Somehow, Vedi figured out how to put it all in reverse, and they continued to wherever they were going and hightailed it. Now, there's a big hole in the wall. Okay, back to the fight, which I am absolutely not doing justice to here. In a nearly final, terrifying wrestling move, Chimera detonated power into the ceiling, bringing himself and Loghryn down in a crater of wood and stone. The blast sobered him. Pain does that. Buried in rubble, the were-demon weirdness that was happening loosened up. Chimera came back just long enough to see what he'd done. The tavern basically destroyed, and Aura was trapped. And at that point, Chimera blacked out. Elsewhere, Nythera fought the mask's whisper to kill. When she saw Ruby standing between Silverfox and a crowd, something kind of held. She couldn't remove the mask immediately. Too much mental strife too quickly. It had been a while for her. Ruby reframed the situation with Silverfox loudly, invented a story about a werewolf heading for the city center, and forced Silverfox to choose between exposure and performance. He chose performance. The guards followed. "This is not over," he said. Great. Problem delayed. Nythera had enough wherewithal, however, to make an audio illusion of a werewolf howl in the distance, lending a little bit more credibility to the story Ruby had pinned Silverfox down with. She slinked away without anyone seeing her to take the mask off and catch her breath for a moment. Ruby found her, and they both hobbled off to Silk Sheets to rest and catch up with their friends, who they didn't know were just finishing up their personal fight club. All right, the next day, Loghryn crawled out of Grizzlebits first. Chimera lay unconscious, back to normal size. That alone felt like a miracle. Then he found Aura, buried, not moving. He dug her out, forced a healing potion into her mouth. Not awake, not okay, but alive. Good enough. With Chimera over one shoulder and Aura over the other, he found one of the paladins. In fact, one of the paladins that had been sort of caught up in this fight club, Barnaby Halfdick. Well, that's not his real name. It's complicated, but we call him Halfdick. Anyway, he probably didn't want anybody to know he was there. Loghryn says to him, listen, there was a werewolf. It got away. It killed all these people. It was terrible. You can even take credit for the story. Barnaby didn't love it. He also didn't argue. He saw the point. He told them he'd help find them a place to hole up for a little bit, get a little bit of healing. I mean, Grizzlebits was a crime scene. They needed to get away from there anyway. Chimera woke up tied to a bed in Barnaby's childhood bedroom. Loghryn sat nearby. Their conversation was calm, about control, about ambition, about loyalty with expectations. Nothing was fixed, but they were aligned. Aura, unfortunately, was gone. Across the city, Ruby and Nythera woke at Silk Sheets after sleeping like the dead. Then reality caught up. Their friends weren't there. What's going on? So they grabbed some coffee and a muffin and they raced to the other side of town, trying to find where Loghryn and Chimera could be. When they passed Grizzlebits, they found paladins, wreckage, and an official werewolf explanation. Ruby read the street instead. Scrape marks, burn scars, firework residue she recognized immediately. The Gearheart had been here, and it probably made this big hole. They followed the trail into the gloaming quarter, where it ended behind the old church. The machine had stopped hard. Drag marks where someone had shoved it out of sight. Scraped, scorched, not wrecked. Cosmetic injuries, expensive ones though. But no one inside. Nythera followed screaming into the church. Inside, the vampire community was fracturing in real time. One faction arguing for restraint, the other done pretending this wasn't already a war. A vampire had been murdered. The city wasn't investigating. Specialized weapons were showing up. The screaming, however, was Chet. He lay delirious on a table, a crossbow bolt embedded in his chest. The wound wasn't just bleeding, it was eating him alive. Nythera recognized the poison immediately. It's called the Uninvited, custom built to kill vampires. She knew how to counter it, but barely. There was a safer option. Finish the transformation. I mean, he's a thrall. Flood him with vampire blood. Higher survival rate, bigger consequences. Now he's a vampire. Ruby leaned in close and asked him, "Do you want to be a vampire?" Chet couldn't answer, so Ruby said no for him. They burned the poison out. Boiling antidote poured into the wound, flesh sizzling, Chet screaming, step by step until the final injection drove it through his system. He passed out, in a good way, alive. Fetty apologetically confessed to Ruby she'd taken the Gearheart because she didn't know what else to do. Ruby realized that this chaos was exactly what the machine was built for. Later, Loghryn and Chimera found the Gearheart too. Chimera felt something before he understood it. Another presence. A soul. Jesse Quickbolt. Somehow bound into the adamantite. Not alive, not dead, just there. Chimera told Loghryn. Loghryn asked him politely to never say that again. Inside the church, the arguments escalated, and as they passed through, Chimera overheard something that hadn't come up in a long time. The blood rain. Not as weather, but as a sign, a return. And that's kind of where we ended that session. Chet was alive but fragile, Aura still missing, the Gearheart quietly haunted, Ruby has no idea, the vampire community splintering even further, and the party almost back together. Chimera and Loghryn reunited with Ruby and Nythera just in time to learn at least a little bit about what happened the day before. Chet was attacked by Silver Fox, who's evidently a serial killer, but Chet's alive and resting in the back of the church. A few words mentioned about a bar fight that went a little too far, but not a whole lot of details yet. Just enough to know that this might be over for now, but it's not over for good. All of that needed to be put on the back burner because Chimera insisted they search for Aura immediately to make sure she was, well, okay. All right, off we go. On the way out, Ruby quickly covered the Gearheart up and ripped out some essential wiring so nobody can drive the thing until she's okay with it. Vetty took us to Aura's favorite emo teenager / Batman brooding over the city spot, a tall, abandoned research tower somewhere in the middle of Esterholt. At the top, we found Aura on the rooftop near the edge, clearly wrecked, clearly trying not to show it, and absolutely not in the mood for anyone to get closer. Chimera does the one thing Chimera does when emotions get scary. He walks straight into them and tries to apologize like a functional adult. And for a moment, it almost works. Then, the universe remembered we were having too much character development, because Aura turns and we see it. Deep scars down the left side of her face and neck, the kind of things that don't just hurt, they're the kind of things that change a person. But before anybody can process that, it gets even worse. A hand in her hair, a crossbow at her head, and Thane Silverfox steps out like he owns the roof and can essentially do anything he wants without repercussions. Why? Turns out the city has promoted Thane, and he's here to cash in. Evidently, he needs a werewolf for the publicity, and while he's at it, he just wants to take care of Nythera for being a nuisance. Gods help him as he thinks he's somehow got the upper hand here, but it did look like it. Thane has a couple of guards on his payroll, evidently, so now they're caught in the mix. With Ruby ready to take a shot at Thane with her wrist ballista, Chimera tried to cast suggestion to get him to back down. With some good rolls from Thane, no luck. So, Nythera moved sneakily from behind. Quiet, fast, surgical. She tried to redirect the crossbow away from Aura while grappling Thane, but he reacted fast, shoving Aura aside and whipping around with something in his offhand. Something he was hiding. So, roll for initiative? So there we were, on the rooftop, ready to get into it. Loghryn sizing the situation up, Nythera closing in for the kill, Ruby distracting with words, and Chimera desperate to get Aura and Vetty out of there. We also have these two city guards in the middle of everything, in way over their heads and not sure what they'd signed up for. Lastly, there's Thane Silverfox, with just enough confidence to think this was going to end well for him. Loghryn tried bribery one more time, because of course he did. The guards declined, which, in hindsight, was a mistake. Because once the talking stopped, the stabbing began. Nythera went first, immediately crit failed, threw her weapon across the roof, and then crit failed again. Ruby ran up and tried to punch Thane and somehow punched Nythera instead. This is not going very well. Chimera set a guard on fire. Loghryn shot the sky so hard the weather actually changed. Yeah, it was a weird roll, but we went with it. Ice and wind started tearing across the rooftop. Everyone was slipping, everyone bleeding, Aura got stabbed, Nythera dropped to a single hit point. Vetty, sweet, loyal, but now furious Vetty, stepped in and drove a blade into Thane hard enough to split his armor. That was the first moment he stopped smiling. Chimera heated Thane's weapons until they burned in his hands. Ruby hammered him with a ghostly dinosaur jaw force from her power gloves. Loghryn disarmed one guard and threw his spear off the roof like he was cleaning up after children. And through all of it, Thane just kept talking. A smug, self-righteous monologue about how he was the only thing keeping Esterholt safe, how Nythera was in his way, how she was the real monster. And then he made his move. He grabbed Nythera by the collar and tried to throw her off the roof. For a split second, it almost worked. But Aura, bleeding and shaken, saw it coming. She bent luck. The future shifted just enough. Nythera didn't fall. She caught her balance, shifted, and used that momentum to roll forward instead. She looked Thane dead in the eyes, blood in her teeth, and told him the difference between them was that she still had her friends. And then she buried a blade in him, twice. And Thane Silverfox, monster hunter, public hero, serial killer, fell backward into the storm and disappeared over the edge of the roof. No last words, just gone. The two guards stood there in the snow, watching their employer vanish into the fog, and suddenly remembered they had families and maybe some complicated feelings about corruption. Loghryn immediately disarmed them, decided everyone was going to have a conversation with the mayor, in person, immediately. And then, when it was quiet, Chimera knelt beside Aura. The adrenaline was gone. The fight was over. She tried to hide the left side of her face, those scars she got from the insane were-demon battle at Grizzlebits. They both admitted they weren't okay, not at all, but realized they could be not okay together, and at least that was something. So, for now, while that was the end of Thane Silverfox, it wasn't the end of the mess, because now we had 2 corrupt guards in custody, a dead public hero in the street below, a city already on edge, and a mayor who had given that man authority, which meant whatever came next was going to be about consequences. And somehow, those are usually worse. Okay, I know what you were thinking, and yeah, we were too. Let's make sure we can find the body, right? Never fear, however, as we confirmed, Thane hit the street and stayed there. No last words or legendary actions, just gravity doing what gravity does. We immediately put the 2 corrupt guards in manacles and marched straight into the next problem, explaining to the city guard why there was a dead hero in the road and several blood-covered adventurers standing over him. Nythera confirmed the kill personally, and while the city guards were at first rightly confused as to exactly what they needed to focus on here, Aura stepped forward and made it very clear this was not random violence. This was a hostage situation gone wrong for the hostage taker. Everyone, ultimately, was escorted under heavy suspicion to Mayor Corbin Hale. In his office, Loghryn laid it out plainly, which is what he does best in these moments. Thane wasn't hunting werewolves. He was staging them, killing people, infecting bodies after the fact to create proof. He murdered the vampire Zira to cover it up, shot Chet, and paid guards to look the other way. Then more receipts hit the desk. Zira's journal, the stolen dagger, Thane's collection of poisons, and a weapon made from a werewolf tooth. Suddenly, the story stopped sounding dramatic and started sounding airtight. Mayor Hale, who was overworked and also looked like a man already several crises behind, listened, and to his credit, he believed the whole thing. Those captured guards were taken in for questioning, and our party was offered protection as personal guests while the city sorted itself out. Before leaving, Ruby mentioned those minotaurs crowding the city. Hale admitted he was trying to keep that situation from becoming a second catastrophe. Loghryn offered to help de-escalate it, maybe even use it as a moment to make a much-needed alliance. In return, we asked for silver to help upgrade our weapons, because while Thane's werewolves were mostly fiction, we know from experience there's still very real ones outside the walls of Esterholt. And so, that takes us through episodes 21 through 40 of Frostbourne. Evidently, this stretch is where we narrowed our focus for a bit and immediately proved that focus does not in fact mean control. So here we are in this future frozen world of Theria, and still at the center of our story is Loghryn Cragborn with a plan to reinstate his entire clan and others into Stone Sunder Mountain. He's built a team of loyal experts and friends to help him do just that. Nythera, Chimera, and Ruby. What's next? Well, whatever happens in Esterholt might take a day or two, but something tells me the gang is ready to leave this city behind for a while. Loghryn's plan needs to move forward, the map needs to open up a bit. Remember, there's a ticking clock on this now, and a lot for us to accomplish if we want to make this happen. We have a lot to think about, and really not enough time to get to it all. There's still Blood Rain omens to figure out, a Gearheart with a Quick Bolt soul in it to address, a Duergar queen watching the clock closely, a few teens we still need to make sure are not in constant mortal danger before we leave them behind, and honestly, we just need to get going on finding more of those components for the Dream Artifact. Oh, and one more thing on the list. Chimera. Because somewhere along this journey, the relationship he has with his patron Kolgoth really stopped being a background hum and started being the loudest thing in the room. Question is, how to manage it. All right, so consider this your warning and your invitation. You're all caught up. If you've been listening this far to Dungeons and Randomness, thank you. If you're new, this is the perfect place to jump into our story. We'd love it if you rate the show, drop us a comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share this recap and the one before it with friends who might love this kind of storytelling. And if you want to go deeper, our Patreon is the best way to do it. Patreon.com/DANDR. Depending on your tier, you'll unlock ad-free episodes, behind-the-scene recordings, Patreon-exclusive campaigns, bonus episodes, and even more groups to follow coming out of Fort Frostbourne and beyond. It's a dwarven mountain of extra content that helps keep our show alive. Also, at higher tiers, you too can become part of the story on one of those Patreon groups where Jason puts you through the ringer and then some. Check it out and see if it's for you. Most of all, come join our Discord. It's where our community really thrives and where you can sound off on every episode. All the links to this are in our description, or just find us online. And please stay tuned for the next 20 or so episodes, and I'll be back with another recap after episode 60. That's all for now, and remember, choose your demonic warlock patrons wisely.